I started off our group this morning with a question. You are being exiled from Pennsylvania. Where do you want to be exiled to? St. John. I hear ya. I'm with ya. What was that? You're going with Deb? Maybe we'll just charter a plane and we'll exile the Bible study to we'll meet in St. John next Tuesday. How does that sound? Did anyone choose to be exiled to the Persian Empire in the year 483 BC? No. Why not? Give me a good reason why you don't want to go there. Yeah, it's a dangerous place for a woman. What about as a person who follows God, as a member of God's people? Would you want to be there? Ungodliness? No, thank you. Yes, I agree. Okay. Well, from our homework and our reading this past week, you already know that the Persian Empire is incredibly wealthy and the king is incredibly powerful. But we also know that there are definite shortcomings to this power and this money that the empire has. Esther 1 and 2 tells us that the empire is an incredibly difficult place to be if you are not particularly powerful, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a young boy, and especially if you are a member of God's people exiled into this pagan kingdom. So I think we can sum up what the Persian Empire is in 3 words: money, power, and sex. Now, does this remind you of the world that we're living in today? Absolutely. I bet if all of us were to pull out our phones right now and go on our social media channel of choice, whether that be Facebook or Instagram, within a few seconds, I believe that we would probably see ads that ask us to buy more. It would show us sexualized images of women and men that emphasizes youth and beauty. And it would also try to convince us that in just a couple of clicks, we can have it all. Thinking about all of this week, I started to think that maybe Peter is onto something in 1 Peter 1:1. Maybe we are Christian exiles living in a foreign land, a new Persian Empire. One that tempts us to live by our pleasures, to give in to our senses, and to use others to get what we desire. Perhaps we aren't all that different than Esther and Mordecai after all. So how important this book is going to be to us if we desire to live as exiles in the world, but not of the world. This is the story of a powerful world empire and God's vulnerable people living in it. So with that in mind, I have titled today's lesson, The Powerful and the Weak. Now, you might notice that I put quotes around each of those adjectives, powerful and weak. And that's because I hope that as we leave here today, we will be challenged to think, what does it mean to be powerful? And what does it really mean to be weak? I hope that today we will learn to be confident that even when we are weak, our God is powerfully working all things according to his purposes. So that is our main point for today. So here's what I'm going to attempt to do in the limited amount of time that I have. I'm going to do my best to move us through these 2 chapters as efficiently as possible. So I want us to look at them in the 4 original sections that the author has laid out for us. First, we're going to look at the power of the empire displayed in Esther 1 through 9. Then we're going to look at the true weakness of the empire revealed in the next section, 10 through 22. Then in chapter 2, verses 1 through 18, we're going to look at the weakness of God's people displayed. This was a hostile kingdom that they're living in. And then we're going to wrap everything up with the true power of God's people revealed in Esther 2, 19 through 23. So let's get started. Our story begins this way. In the days of Ahasuerus, much like Ruth began in the days of the judges, Our story begins in a new set of days. Only this time, instead of the story beginning with an unknown family in Israel, our story begins with the most powerful and most well-known man in the world. King Ahasuerus has decided to throw a royal feast for all of his officials and his army. Now, the goal of this feast is to impress important, powerful people with the wealth and splendor of the Persian kingdom. But the author stops just short of telling us why has he decided to do the celebration. Now, extra biblical sources do tell us why the king has decided to throw this elaborate party. And you'll see the king's predecessor, King Darius, amassed a vast kingdom, but he failed to capture one place, Athens in Greece. King Ahasuerus' goal was to finish what his father Darius had started. Now, Herodotus writes that in the third year of his reign, in 483 BC, this very year, King Ahasuerus holds a great war council with all of his military leaders, and he said to them, "For this cause I have summoned you together, that I may impart to you my purpose. It is my intent to punish the Athenians for what they have done to the Persians and to my father. As for you, powerful men, this is how you shall best please me. When I declare the time for your coming, every one of you must appear, and with a good will. And whoever comes with his army best equipped shall receive from me such gifts as are reckoned as most precious among us." So we can know from pairing this with our section today, we can see that this lavish celebration is held to impress powerful men and to display all the sumptuous rewards that they would get in exchange for their loyalty and military support in Greece. So, as you read chapter 1, were you impressed by the things that were on display during the celebration? Right? The length of the party itself is impressive. Is anybody like me? I hate parties. I like to see people. I get overwhelmed at a party. I cannot imagine being at a 6-month-long party. 6 months is one long party. We hear of fine linens and drapery and couches made of gold and silver. I wonder what that would have been like. We see gold drinking vessels and free-flowing wine. And even the pavement, for crying out loud, is paved with purple and marble and mother of pearl and precious stones. Everything about the celebration is designed to be an advertisement for the benefits of being loyal to the king and to the empire. What about the king's power? He has power to command everything of everyone down to how much they're allowed to drink, right? There is no compulsion, right? He has command over everything, or at least he should have command over everything. The next 2 verses are going to reveal to us that while everything looks great and powerful on the outside of the empire, on the inside, not everything is as it seems. King Ahasuerus seems to have all luxury under his feet and everything under his command. But the book of Esther is going to reveal to us that the power of earthly rulers only reaches so far. So our first clue for this unraveling is going to come in verse 9. Who was on the guest list for the banquet? Did anybody pick up on this? Well, we know from reading verse 9 that there were only men present at this celebration. The queen and the women were to go to a separate, totally separate celebration, a separate feast inside the palace. Aha. Now, do you get to sense of the mood that's going on at the celebration? This is a feast for only men. And the power of the empire is on display. They're drinking. They're raising a glass to their own wealth. They're getting rowdy. They're celebrating their own power. And it's not too long before this revelry begins to turn to locker room talk. Once you've talked about money and power, the next natural thing that men will probably talk about is sex. And this is going to move us on to our next section today, where the weakness of the empire is going to be revealed. In verse 10, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so in other words, he's probably had one too many, he's boasting, right? And he commands 7 eunuchs to go to the queen. Now, 7 eunuchs represents that this king thought he had complete power. Do you guys remember the number 7 being very important in the book of Revelation? It's the number of completion. So in other words, total power. So he commands 7 eunuchs in total power to go to Queen Vashti and bring her before the king wearing her royal crown, so that the company might see her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. Now, we do not know what else Vashti would have worn. It might have been revealing, or perhaps she was wearing nothing at all, or desired to have nothing on at all. But the goal of summoning her before these men was so that these men could look on her body and ogle her. The king wants to show off that he has the sexiest, most desirable woman in the world at his command and disposal. But what happens? Vashti refuses to come. I kind of get the sense that Vashti was probably an older woman. Probably not a young bride, you know what I mean? I don't know that for sure. But Vashti refuses to come, and here we see the irony of all ironies. The all-powerful king has no power to bend a human will to his own. And he has no real power, even in his own home. It might be a palace, but he has no power over his wife. Now, the author of Esther is inviting us to laugh at the absurdity of it all and the embarrassment of this king in front of all of his most important officials. The king is trying to prove his omnipotence, but instead he shows his impotence. King Ahasuerus, this name, I'll tell you what, we couldn't just say Xerxes. The king, the great and powerful, has no control over his own wife. Now, he could order her to come against his will, but this is not what he wants. He wants a woman who is at his beck and call and ready to do whatever he wants. So how does he react? Well, he flies into a rage. His response to this embarrassment is to summon the wisest men, again, 7 men, complete, very wise men, to the kingdom, who are versed in law and judgment. Now, one commentary I read made me laugh, so I wanted to share it with you. It said, "Do not think of this group of men as the Magnificent Seven. Think more of them like the king and the 7 dwarves." King Ahasuerus, the all-powerful, all-knowing king, cannot make a decision without the suggestions of others. So what do these advisors say? Well, they suggest 2 changes be made. First, they suggest that Queen Vashti be banished from the king's presence, never to appear before him again. And we can laugh at this because this is exactly where Vashti doesn't want to be in the first place, right? That's like saying to someone who's already resigned, "You can't quit. You're fired," right? And then the second law they suggest to be put into effect is that all women give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. One commentator I wrote said, "How are they going to enforce this? Go door to door? Like, hello, sir, is your wife obeying you today?" So letters are sent to all the provinces that every man must be master in his own household. In this scene, we are invited to laugh at this all-powerful king, because here we find out that the king and the empire is powerful, but they are not invincible. There is only one who is truly all-powerful, and that is God himself. He is absolutely sovereign, and his power knows no limit. Unlike the king, he is all-wise, all-powerful, and all good. He is sovereign over kings and nations and uses them to accomplish his good purposes in the world. I read this while I was studying this week. Isaiah 46, 8 through 10 says, "Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose." This is the true king, right? Who needs no one to give him advice. He depends on himself, and everything he does, he will accomplish. Now, as Christian exiles in the world, we can look on the earthly power of kings and laugh, because we know the one who controls all things. We can trust God and rest assured knowing that even in times of trial and difficulty and persecution, God is still carrying out his purposes on earth. Kings may plot and make plans, but Proverbs 21:1 tells us that the king's heart is like a stream of water in the hand of the Lord, and he turns it wherever he will. The true weakness of the Persian Empire and King Ahasuerus is now fully revealed to us. He is not as powerful as he seems. However, he still can do some damage with the power that he has. So now we're going to look at what it meant to be a weak person in the Persian Empire. So let's move on to our next section, the weakness of God's people displayed. After this, King Ahasuerus' anger abates. And I love the way that the author writes this here. He's showing us that there is a note of insecurity and doubt even over the decision that the king has made towards Queen Vashti. Chapter 2, verse 1 tells us that the king remembers Vashti and what she's done and then what he declared. And he realizes he doesn't have a queen by his side anymore. How is this going to look to the rest of the world when he has no beautiful queen by his side doing his will? That's not going to look very powerful at all. So he's kind of worked himself up into a lather. And this time, the king's young men, or his household servants, come to soothe his ego. They come up with this plan to help King Ahasuerus keep up appearances. So they suggest a kingdom-wide search be made where all the beautiful young virgins be captured and given no choice but to be brought to the king's harem in Susa. The virgin that pleases the king the most will be given the role of queen. To be sure, this plan cooked up by the king's young men is an abuse of the empire's power. These young women are seen merely as sex objects. They are captured against their will, and any possibility of future marriage, home, or family has been completely taken away from them. I mean, unless they win. Now, we know that in the empire, this happens not just to females, but to males as well. I'm going to turn to my friend Herodotus one more time. He tells us that every year in the Persian Empire, 500 young boys, every year, once a year, 500 young boys were taken from Babylon and Assyria and castrated for service as eunuchs every year. So we can see that it's not just women's sexuality that the king controls, but male sexuality as well. Can you imagine? When I was writing this, I was like, I can't imagine my daughter being taken away from me in this way. But can you imagine a little boy, like it makes me want to cry, a little boy being taken away from you and abused in these ways? It's absolutely wicked. The author now turns our attention from this powerful, wicked empire towards the weakest trying to survive in this empire. We're told in chapter 2, verse 5, now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shammai, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, whose family have been carried off. Now Mordecai is living as an exile in Susa. What do we know about this title, son of Kish? Did anybody get curious and go look it up? Who also shared the title, son of Kish? King Saul. Okay. Yep. King Saul also had the title, son of Kish. Now, this is going to be very important as we go on in the book of Esther. So for now, I want you to take son of Kish, fold it up, stick it in your back pocket, and be ready to bring it out later. So we're told Mordecai's heritage. We know his origin story. He's a member of the people of God. He's related to King Saul, and he's exiled in Susa along with his orphaned cousin Hadassah, or Esther, as we're going to come to know her. She is being raised by her cousin Mordecai. Esther and Mordecai are outsiders. Even though Mordecai has a position as a civil servant, they both are insignificant in power and status. They are vulnerable and weak. And unfortunately for Esther, she is very beautiful and lovely to look at. So this means that when the king's edict is proclaimed, Esther is taken to the king's palace and falls captive in the king's harem. Mordecai charges Esther, as we find out in verses 10 and 20 of chapter 2, not to reveal her true religious identity to anyone in the royal court. It must remain a secret. Now, why do you think Mordecai is charging Esther in this way? Anybody have an idea? For her safety. That's exactly it. It's very dangerous to be a member of God's people. This is a God-hating empire. And it is not safe for Esther to reveal this part of her identity. Mordecai is worried that Esther might face difficulty, persecution, or even opposition in the Persian court because of who she really is. There is an atmosphere of ever-present hostility towards God's people in the Persian court. Now, because of this big secret, Esther is going to suddenly have to live in the tension of two identities as Jewish girl who is now thrust and living in this pagan court. And not even just the pagan court, a pagan harem in the court. But God is still working on Esther's behalf. From almost the moment of her arrival in this harem of virgin women, Esther, we're told, begins to find favor. Now, this is just like Ruth, right? Like she's just happens to come to the field of Boaz, right? Esther just happens to find favor with the ruling eunuch Haggai, right? Now, imagine if they're taking 500 boys away every year. Can you imagine how many hundreds of women would have been in this contest? And yet she is the one who is singled out for special treatment. We're told that Haggai gives her cosmetics and food and even 7 young women out of that harem to attend her. He elevates Esther to the best place within this harem. And even though God is not explicitly mentioned here, we are invited to see God's hand at work in the success that Esther begins to enjoy. But even in all this success, the author reminds us in verse 20 that Esther is keeping her Jewish identity secret. So, the young virgin women have been in this harem, and after 12 months of cosmetic treatments, did you guys read those? They looked good. They smelled good. I'm sure they wore beautiful clothes and said beautiful words. Maybe they had talents of like playing a lyre or something like that. 12 months of beauty treatments. And each young woman at the end of this 12 months would go in to spend one night with the king. We were told that the girl would leave the harem of virgin women. I can't imagine this, being a woman who has never known a man. Leaving and going to the king in the evening, spending the whole night with the king. Who knows what goes on? And in the morning, the young woman would be brought to a second harem. Did you pick up on that? There's 2 harems. A second harem where the king's concubines were kept. Now, in other words, these are young women who are no longer virgins. And the young woman would be held captive in this harem unless the king was delighted in her and asked her to come back by name. What a sad and demeaning prospect. Now, once the young woman had spent the night with the king, all of her future marriage prospects, as I said earlier, were now over, because it is considered treason for anyone else to have sexual relations with one of the king's concubines. So finally, Esther's turn with the king comes, and we're told that this event takes place 4 years after Queen Vashti's fall from power. And the author mentions this so we might know just how unlikely it is that Esther is going to win this contest. It is very unlikely that out of all the hundreds of women and all the hundreds of nights, after 4 years, how many nights is that? What's 365 times 4? That's a lot of women, right? That's how unlikely it is that Esther is going to be successful. But God is working. Even though Esther is weak, God is powerful. And God is working on her behalf and on his people's behalf by giving Esther this supernatural favor in the sight of the king. And we're told in verse 17 that the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight. In other words, she wins the contest. And now, before we get swept up into this unlikely love story between the king and Esther, I have to burst our bubble a little bit. I want to point out to you that the word loved there, you can circle it, does not imply that there is any kind of emotional bond between Esther and the king. That word loved is actually the same word in the original Hebrew that is translated as lust in 2 Samuel 13:1 in that relationship between Amnon and Tamar. Esther has won the king's desire and is crowned queen in Vashti's vacant place. And then a celebration follows. So Esther is now Queen Esther, but we have to keep in mind that even though Esther is wearing Vashti's crown, she enjoys no more power than Vashti had. Her position is still very fragile. And not only that, but Esther has this other layer on top of that, is that she is still a member of God's covenant people, a vulnerable exile in a foreign, hostile land. But even in all this difficulty and trouble, we can see that God is working on Esther's behalf and behalf of his people. He is moving kings in the direction he wants them to go. He is removing queens from power. He is giving Esther favor with everyone at the court. And now he's going to do something else for Mordecai that will show that even when God's people are weak, they have power. God acts for them and through them. So this is going to bring us to our last section for today, the power of God's people revealed. So I'm going to pick it up in verse 19. We're told that Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate. Did this remind you of Ruth? Yay, I'm so glad you remembered that. Okay. Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate. So this indicates to us that Mordecai is some kind of civil servant, some kind of bureaucrat in the Persian government. So what I read was at the gate of the palace, or the king's gate, there was like a big wall, and inside the walls were like 2 rooms where they would go and conduct business. So somehow, behold, remember, like, oh, it just happens to be there. Mordecai just happens to be there at the city gates doing his job. Like I said, he's not particularly powerful or influential. And the author tells us that as he's sitting there, he overhears 2 eunuchs planning to assassinate the king. This is God working, to be sure. Mordecai immediately somehow gets a message to Esther. Now, in the book, we saw that he would go by the harem every day just to check and see how she's doing. So somehow they have a way of communicating, and Mordecai is able to get a message to her, and he saves the king's life. He tells the court of this plot that's going to happen, and Esther goes to the king, and he tells that this plot is going to happen in the name of Mordecai. She says this, but she doesn't reveal that they're related. She doesn't reveal that they're Jewish, anything like that. She just says, in the name of Mordecai. She goes in and reveals this plot of assassination. And the two eunuchs that we saw are put to death. They're impaled. That is the chosen execution practice of the Persian Empire, is to get a big, tall, sharp pole, and you'd be impaled on it. So these two men are executed. And we would hope that Mordecai would be rewarded for giving this information to the king, but all we're told is that his name and this incident are recorded in the chronicles in the presence of the king. So if we ended today's lesson right here, I might leave you wondering, what kind of power does the weak of God's people have in this moment? What power does weak Mordecai have? Right? Mordecai has just done this righteous thing and saved a king who probably doesn't deserve to be saved. Right? We could probably make a very good argument that this king is not a very nice person, who doesn't really value people very much, and he's ruling over a kingdom that is not very righteous at all. It's very pagan. But if we zoom out and we look at the rest of the book of Esther, we can see that this incident where Mordecai is overlooked is all part of God's grander plan for his people. And this week, I have been, I love podcasts, and with my sister coming, I was cleaning my house like crazy. So I listen to podcasts as I clean. And this week, I was listening to one on D-Day. And they were talking about the beaches of Omaha and Utah and like all the beaches and stuff. And they were talking about how they couldn't sweep any of the mines that were around the beach ahead of time because it would have let the Germans know that they were coming. So they said they sent these two minesweepers ahead that cleared a path of travel between the beaches. Well, on D-Day, they sent, I think the number was over 4,000 ships and landing crabs, like an incredible armada of ships and men that had to get to the beaches of Normandy. But they couldn't just go anywhere they wanted. They had to go in a very certain order according to a plan, because they needed specific men to get on the beach to do a specific job first. And they also needed to make sure that they carefully coordinated 4,000 ships to go through this very narrow lane of transportation between these mines. Now, and it made me think this is just like God's plans, right? If it were up to us, we just roll right on up and just do it the way we wanted to. And if it were us we would be like, we need to reward Mordecai right now for what he just did. But that's not how God works. God works in a very deliberate way with a very specific plan, and he is moving things around. In the podcast, they said it's like Tetris. That's exactly what's going on here. God is moving circumstances and events, and he will reward Mordecai eventually, but in his perfect timing. Even though Mordecai is not rewarded right now, he will be. And it's going to be according to God's grander plan for his people. Even though nobody notices Mordecai's righteousness, God notices. And even though it might seem to us that God is not working for Mordecai at all, we can be sure that he is working just according to his plan. God is the most patient being in existence. He is not troubled by timetables like we are. He is not impatient to get things done. He works completely patiently and completely perfectly, and that is what he's going to do here. This whole incident, and specifically Mordecai's name being written down in that chronicle, is going to be incredibly important in Esther 6. And when we get there and we hear of when it's finally revealed that Mordecai did this thing, we're all going to cheer. But for right now, it's not in God's timing. The best is yet to come. And it's going to happen in the most ironic part of this whole story. So you have to come back for chapter 6 now. Even in Mordecai's weakness, God is working on his behalf. And we're going to see all that come to fruition very soon. All right. So that's where our chapter ends for today. Now, I began our time together asking you, where would you choose to be exiled from Pennsylvania if you had a choice? And before we leave today, I want to bring to your attention one more exile before we leave today. That exile is Jesus himself. I didn't really think about it in this way until I started studying this book this week. But here's what I came to find. Jesus, God's Son, chose to be exiled from heaven and to come here to earth. He was a king, a true king. But he didn't come in royal splendor or in glory. He didn't wear the finest clothes or lay on a couch of gold. He was a baby, and his bed was a manger, and his garments were swaddling cloths. He chose to take the form of a weak human being, a man who was a part of God's covenant people, the most despised race on the earth. He chose to live a life of poverty, trusting only in what God, his Father, would provide for him, and he carried out his Father's will obediently and righteously, even to the cross. Even his death was full of weakness and shame. He died a death of weakness so that we might know the power of God to forgive our sins. He might have died in weakness, but we can be sure that he rose with true power. And I look forward to the day when he will come again, because this time he will not come in weakness. He will come in power. He will come clothed in glory, riding on the clouds of heaven. And this sight will be so awesome and magnificent that the Bible tells us that every knee will bow and tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And when he comes to earth, this king will put right every injustice that has ever been suffered in this world at the hands of evil men. The Bible tells us, in fact, in Matthew 19:30 and 20:16, that when Jesus comes, he will usher in a new kingdom and a new empire. And in that empire, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And until that day comes, let us all remember that even in our weakness, God is powerfully working all things according to his purpose. All right, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll sing. And I got done 5 minutes early. I really thought I'd be over today. Woo, all right, let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being who you are, Lord, that there is no evil in you. You are completely trustworthy and holy and good. And God, it's so wonderful to think about that when we look around at the world we're living in and we see all the abuses of power that have been present even since the time of Esther, since before that time. God, we know that you are working even when we don't see it. God, help us to be patient like you are patient. Help us to trust that you are working all things and all circumstances, even when we don't see it, that God, you are working them together for our good and for your glory. God, I want to pray now For the people that are in Iran, I want to pray for them. I pray for our brothers and sisters and churches over there. I pray for men and women to come to know you. I pray that your name would be made great in the Middle East. God, I pray that your name would be made great here in the United States, right here in Hanover. God, let it begin on our streets and around our neighbors and our friends. God, we pray that we would live as exiles who are ambassadors for you, eager to tell people about you. I pray that we would thoughtfully engage the world, but remember that our home is in heaven. God, I just thank you so much for this word from Esther this morning. I want to pray for Maria as she prepares our lesson for next week. God, I just thank you for the gift of women who love your word. I thank you for the women that are gathered here in this room that have made a commitment to be here and to study your word, to learn from it. God, I pray that their study would be fruitful this week. God, bring us all back here safely, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.